If they get submerged under the water, the tanks are flooded with seawater, and it's the weight of that water that brings her down. So to resurface her, that water needs to be pushed out with compressed air. The air makes the tanks lighter, buoyancy returns, and she floats to the surface. So behind me, you've got the iconic fin or sow, which is really housing the foremast that you can see poking out the top. So the first one is the attack periscope. Behind that is her search periscope. The one that's got the little green curved metal bit on the top is her radar, and the tallest one is the communications mast. So we're going to go on board now. Okay, welcome aboard everybody. You're now standing in the forward torpedo compartment. You can see the 6 torpedo tubes in a bit more detail. You can see the little yellow seat that's in between the torpedoes. That was originally the first firing position. So imagine an actual man had to sit there in between those torpedoes to actually fire from that original firing position. Behind you, on the port side, is a Mark 8 torpedo. It weighs 1.5 tons. It has a range of approximately 3 miles and a top speed of approximately 45 knots. It's a simple, unguided torpedo. It's designed to detonate on impact. Now these were used around the mid-20s, right through the Second World War up to around the mid-1980s. And it was 2 of those types of torpedoes, not from this submarine, but 2 of those torpedoes that sunk the General Belgrano in the Falklands conflict. Now it had a hit ratio of 1 out of 3. So basically she hit 1 out of 3 targets. And believe it or not, she could actually house up to 24 of those torpedoes in this compartment where we're standing. So you'd have 6 in the tubes, and the rest of the 18 would be on racks where we're standing and under the underlevel that you can see through the grate there. Generally, she would only usually carry about 16, but she had the capacity to 24 in there. So this compartment also had a second use, and it was the forward escape hatch, which you can see up the front here. So if you were crew and you were living and working at this end of the submarine, and if things had gone wrong and you needed to escape, you'd come into this compartment, you'd put on the emergency escape suit, which isn't a red onesie, it's the Navy's immersion suit. And you would take it in turns, there'd be a little ladder hooked onto here to go up through the hatch. Now you had to go one at a time, you had to seal the hatch, wait for the pressure to be equalised within the hatch before you could swim up to the surface. But it was quite a timely escape. It was known as a controlled escape, but it took quite a matter of time to get each man through that way. So if they didn't have time for that, they would have to carry out what's known as a rush escape. So again, if you were working and living at this end of the submarine, you would come in here. Now that hatch that you can see behind you, they would then close and seal that watertight hatch door. This compartment would then be flooded with water. The level of the water would rise up until, again, the pressure was equalised in here. Now you couldn't breathe in any remaining air because it would be compressed air. So you would need to use one of these, which is known as BIBS. It stands for a built-in breathing system. If you look around the deck head, you can see all the brass nozzles which these plug into, and each crew member would have his own mask. So we'll plug this in, be able to breathe a supply of oxygen. Each man would then pass from mast to mast until they reach the hatch, and then they would swim up through the hatch. Now hopefully, if you got to the top, you would have to remember, very important, to breathe out as you swam up to the surface, because with all that pressure your lungs would likely to explode if they didn't. So if you made it to the top, hopefully there would be a rescue vessel at the top waiting for you. So escaping a submarine, not a very attractive proposition, and each crew member was drilled regularly in this procedure. And if you didn't pass the test, then you simply have no place working on the submarine. Right, so we're going to make our way now through the forward. We've got 18 bunks within this area, and there's a further 3 in the corridor. Now, you wouldn't all be here at the same time. Generally, the shift pattern on board the submarine would be 6 hours on and 6 off. So when you'd finish your shift, you'd come in here, get into your bunk, you'd sleep. Not a lot of privacy, as you can see. The most privacy you're going to get once you're in your bunk is pulling that curtain. There's also not a lot of storage in here, so the crew were only allowed to really bring 2 changes of clothes, 1 sleeping bag and 1 pillow, and a very, very small amount of personal effects, which were hidden or stowed in these little lockers underneath the bottom bunk. So there was a crew of 69 in total on board, which included 7 commissioned officers and the captain, and they could be away for up to 12 weeks at a time. So underneath the floor here is also the first of Ocelot's 2 batteries. Now each battery has 220 cells plus 1 spare, combined weight of around 300 tonnes. Now remember, she's a diesel-electric submarine, so she relies on her batteries to bring power to the ship's systems and the electric motors on board. So when she's submerged, she doesn't run her diesels, she relies on her battery power. So we are going to walk through now to the control room. As we go along the corridor, if you look on the starboard side, so as you're walking, that would be your left side, you'll poke your head in and you can see the next step up of ratesmen. So that's the senior rates, so that's your petty officers and your chief petty officers. Now there's less bunks in there and a little bit more privacy because they're off the main corridor. There's no corridor in here, so if you're working in the forward torpedo compartment, you're trying to get some sleep, people are coming and going in this actual mess area here. The standard length of the bunks is pretty the same. It doesn't matter whether you're chief officer or petty officer or junior rates, the standard bunk is always the same throughout. And someone just asked me, was there a height restriction on Ocelot? The answer is no. Some of the captains that served were well over 6 foot. The admiral of the Dockyard today is a gentleman called Sir Trevor Saw. He was one of the former captains on board the Ocelot, and he's 6'4". As we just go into the control room, on the port side, so on the right side, you'll see his cabin, the captain's cabin. Don't blink, because you will miss it. And make sure you have a good look in it, because it's probably not as big as what you thought. Okay. So we'll meet up in the control room. Just further along.
Tidy, isn't it?
Nice, isn't it? You see, I can make this home.
Yeah, 100 feet underwater. Come on, John.
On the dock side. So there's lots going on in here, but the main things that I wanted to point out and talk to you about were the periscopes. So this is the attack periscope, and that's the search periscope. The attack periscope is smaller on the surface. Remember, she's a surveillance submarine, so she's less likely to be detected on the surface with the smaller periscope sticking out. Behind the brown curtains was the radar room. Unfortunately, after she was decommissioned and brought to Chatham, and made suitable for visitors, most of the equipment was actually removed. So I think all you'll find in there these days is probably a Hoover and broom, probably. So behind me is the plotting tables, which were used before modern day GPS. So they used to dead reckoning at the plotting tables. They'd take the speed, the course, the time, and they would calculate, they would dead reckon the position of the submarine. Over here to the right, you've got the secondary firing positions for the torpedoes. Remember you saw that little yellow seat in the first compartment? Well, after subsequent refits, the firing positions were brought back into here, into the control room. Okay, so on the port side, you've got the blow-in and the diving panels, and they really basically work by keeping the submarine in trim. And when I say trim, it means the position of the submarine when she's in the water. It's a very, very difficult job to keep a submarine in trim of this class, especially when you're firing torpedoes, because all of a sudden you're going to have all this weight leaving the bow end. Remember, she's a spy submarine. What you don't want to happen is the bow to be so light that it rises up and it breaks the surface. It compromises her position. So it was someone's job at all one engines, and they were made here in Chatham specifically for this type of submarine. So she's very much homegrown here in Chatham. So remember, she's a diesel-electric submarine. The diesel can only run the diesel engines when she's actually on the surface. The reason being for that is that there's two little masts that we call snort masts or snorkels that are hidden within the black mast at the top of the submarine. You couldn't see them from the top side, but they're actually just in the middle there. Can you see those circular? That's right. You point those two to come in here, and they also need a mast for the exhaust fumes to go out, which you can only do when you're up on the surface. She doesn't want to break the surface, she just comes up enough just for those two masts to poke through. And as long as she can snorkel, then she can run those diesel engines, and it's the diesel engines that turn the two electric generators that are underneath here. The generators charge the batteries, and the batteries provide power to the electric motors. So she's half and half. When she's submerged, she uses her batteries, and when she's on the surface, she uses her diesel. Okay. We're going to make our way along the last corridor here now, towards the end of the submarine. There is the speed of the submarine to be set. The command will come from the control room, but the speed is actually set to motoring. She's capable of doing about 17 knots submerged, which I believe is around about 20 miles an hour, and 12 knots on the surface. And people are always up there.
When's that?
So what class of submarine were you?
When's that?
So more like maintenance. That was your job.
Die.
Right, this last hatch is a little. We've saved the hardest to last. So just watch yourselves there. Need a bit more body strength to get through. It's a slightly raised one. So you can just about see here inside the hole. Ocelot was fitted with two aft torpedoes, and you can see they've been taken out and blanked off in the hole there. Now the reason for that was when the type of torpedo being used back here, which was the Mark 20, was made obsolete. So they took out the torpedoes because they weren't used anymore. The upside for taking them out is that rather than having torpedoes all here as spares, was they could fit more bunks in. So generally on Ocelot, for a crew of 69, each man had his own bunk. So there was no hot bunking, unless they had reserves, which was a good thing. I've had a couple of ex-submariners on my tours, and they said it was great news when the torpedoes were taken out of the tubes, because it was a great place to store the beer. It was a nice, cold place to store things that you needed to be cold. And there's been quite a few of them that have told me that story, so I think I believe that is true. So also back here, Ocelot was fitted with a different kind of sonar, a passive sonar. So unlike the black sonar at the front of the submarine when we looked at on the dock side, the passive sonar simply listens. And it's towed behind the submarine, generally on the port side, on a long cable. It has hydrophones dotted all along the cable. And it just simply listens, which is really what a surveillance submarine is all about, listening to what's happening, listening to looking out for other hydroplanes in the water. Okay, so that's the end of our tour now. Thank you very much for coming on board.
Yeah.
As you go back up the ladder, if you could just leave a little gap in between each person so you're not